I'm really passionate about sustainable fashion, but I recognize that there are many issues with the movement in terms of accessibility, inclusivity, and lack of emphasis on garment worker rights. In this video, I wanted to talk about these issues to hopefully reframe your approach to the movement. If you're new here, I'm Lily and I talk about realistic sustainable fashion and living on this channel. I also have a sustainable fashion TikTok and a blog about sustainability, travel, and running. If you're into those things, I hope you'll stick around. Let's first talk about the mainstream portrayal of sustainable fashion, which is incredibly flawed. Many people believe that sustainable fashion is all about purchasing from expensive ethical brands and is inaccessible as a result. It's true that some aspects of sustainable fashion aren't always accessible, but there are many other ways to participate. You absolutely don't have to buy sustainable clothing to be part of the movement. In fact, the most sustainable things you can do are to wear what you already own, buy less, and buy used if you need something, if you can, mend clothing when it breaks, wear pieces multiple times before washing, air drying your clothes to make them last, repurposing ratty clothes as rags or something else. These are all things that low-income, BIPOC, and immigrant communities have been doing for years. Richer people love to use low-income people to say that sustainable fashion is classist and then use that as an excuse to keep buying massive hauls. But real sustainable fashion isn't classist at all. Most lower-income folks naturally participate in sustainable fashion just due to their circumstances. I think this misunderstanding is in large part due to influencers who will promote this superficial idea of sustainable fashion with their massive hauls from sustainable brands. The words sustainable and haul are totally contradictory, as true sustainability means buying less. I also think people have a negative perception of ethical fashion because some advocates shame people for buying fast fashion. Not everyone can avoid fast fashion due to money, size options, lack of access to thrift stores, or lack of time. If someone buys fast fashion out of necessity or only buys what they truly love and takes good care of it, I'm not going to judge that person. If they're not over-consuming, they're not the problem. Sure, there are many alternatives to fast fashion, but you also need to have the time and education to know where to look. I waited literally over half a year to find a specific pair of running shorts secondhand from a Facebook group. Some people simply can't afford to wait or spend time digging like that. For example, someone could need something for a last-minute interview or a hiking trip. Now let's talk about the lack of diversity and inclusion in the sustainable fashion movement. If many BIPOC often naturally lead sustainable lives, why aren't more BIPOC the face of sustainability movements? I do feel that things have started to shift and that there's better representation among creators at least, but maybe I just happen to follow more diverse creators as an Asian woman. In fashion specifically though, there's still a lack of diversity in models and brand executives. Things are getting better, but I want to see real transparency from brands about their diversity stats and hiring. Girlfriend Collective is one brand that has actually shared and followed up about these stats. Size inclusivity is another huge issue in sustainable fashion. Most sustainable brands only go up to an extra large. This is actually a problem in the fashion industry in general. A lot of fast fashion brands are also not size inclusive, like Urban Outfitters or Topshop. But the major fast fashion brands like Forever 21 and H&M do have plus size options, and since there are more fast fashion brands, there tend to be more brands with extended sizing. We can't expect a lot of people to buy from ethical brands if they don't carry sizes that work for most people. Even worse, many ethical brands are realizing the need for diversity, so they seek out BIPOC creators to promote their brand, but refuse to pay them fairly. I've had several sustainable brands reach out to me and only offer product as payment, but ask for a ton of content in return. Creating content is work, and it should be paid fairly, especially by these so-called conscious brands. This feels more like tokenism and virtue signaling than true inclusivity. This happens in the plus size community as well. In 2017, Urban Outfitters included a plus size model in their campaign when they didn't even offer clothing in the model's size. So another major issue is greenwashing. I've already talked a lot about greenwashing, but I think it's important to mention briefly in this video because it's a big problem in sustainable fashion. Greenwashing is when brands market themselves as eco-friendly when they actually aren't. Many popular brands are guilty of this, including Everlane and H&M Conscious. More and more consumers care about the environment, but a lot of them don't quite understand what makes a brand truly sustainable, so they can be easily taken advantage of. If brands say they use natural or dead stock material, people think that's enough. And it's definitely not enough. For a brand to be sustainable, you need to consider their production process, certifications, labor practices, diversity and inclusion, and marketing. I have a whole video on how to evaluate fashion brands, so check it out up above if you want to learn more. Now let's talk about the lack of emphasis on garment worker rights. Sustainable fashion isn't only about the environment, it's also about human rights. I had one person comment on a TikTok that they wanted to stop the overconsumption, but they didn't want to pay people more, and I was like, this is all interconnected. Overconsumption exists because of the low prices, and the low prices exist because garment workers are exploited and paid next to nothing. Basically, it's all capitalism for you. It's no secret that garment workers are mistreated, but many people don't understand just how horrible their situation is. Let's take the example of the pay-up movement. At the start of the pandemic, many major brands canceled orders and left garment workers without pay. In April, only 3% of workers said they had enough to eat. It's also worth noting that 80% of garment workers are women, and many work in developing countries as the primary breadwinners. Entire families and communities were suffering and continue to suffer. In fact, many brands, including American Eagle and Urban Outfitters, have still yet to pay. Even worse, many of these brands posted about BLM, but have still yet to pay their predominantly women of color garment workers. People love to say that fast fashion provides people jobs in developing countries, but these jobs aren't stable or safe. Even if these jobs are relatively better compared to other options, they're still unacceptable, and we should be fighting for better and supporting better companies if we can. One way to help garment workers is to sign the petition over at payupfashion.com. The petition calls for fair pay, worker safety, transparency, and industry regulations. You can also donate through the website, and the money will go directly to garment worker organizations. I donated $50 back on Giving Tuesday, and I hope you'll join me in donating if you can. These petitions do work, and the spring pay up petition successfully pressured many brands to pay for those canceled orders. If you know of other garment worker issues people should know about and ways to help, please let me know. I have another video planned on this topic and want to spotlight more of these human rights issues. Finally, I want to point out that fast fashion is a systemic problem. Like I said earlier, sustainable fashion is about way more than just conscious consumption. The problem with every sustainability movement is green capitalism, or the idea that we can buy our way out of the climate crisis. When we focus too much on buying more sustainable options, we actually end up with more stuff that we don't need and also take the focus off of systemic issues. That being said, I believe in finding a balance between making lifestyle changes and pushing for systemic change. After all, we as consumers fuel these corporations through our purchases. I've noticed that people love to use the phrase, "there's no ethical consumption under capitalism," as an excuse to continue their avoidable unsustainable behavior. They also love to use accessibility as an excuse when they actually do have access to better options. Yes, it's impossible to be 100% ethical, and I understand that. Even thrifting isn't totally ethical because some corporate stores mistreat their workers. But that said, some decisions are better than others. It's better environmentally to thrift than to buy from Shein. It's better to buy a used or refurbished phone than to buy a new one. Or you could even still buy a new phone or buy fast fashion, but just keep it and use it for years and years. That's better than buying something new every year or buying a haul every week. I will always encourage making better choices if they're accessible to you. Luckily, buying less clothing should save you money and time, so it's naturally more accessible. But if certain lifestyle changes are too burdensome, then don't do them and use that energy instead for actions with a larger impact. For instance, I'm nowhere near zero waste, as it's difficult for me to find package-free food. Rather than go out of my way to do that, I instead spend that time spreading awareness online about sustainable fashion and living. Or I'll donate to environmental and social justice nonprofits, or phone bank for political campaigns. In my opinion, it's really all about finding a balance between realistic lifestyle changes and actions with a broader impact. I hope this video gave you a different perspective of sustainable fashion, and I'd love to hear from you on the aspects of the movement that you feel need to be changed. As always, the text version of this video will be up over at my blog. Thank you for watching and hanging out with me, and I'll see you all next time.